Welcome to Dreadful Screams. Tonight's special, 3 stories, cooked with fear, where diners never close, and some customers never leave. Welcome to the Restaurant of the Damned. I've worked at a lot of restaurants over the years. Some fancy, some greasy, some that never lasted more than a few months. But there's one place I'll never forget. A small diner off a quiet stretch of highway called the Crossroads Cafe. If you've ever driven through rural towns late at night, you've probably seen a place like it. Neon sign buzzing, half the lights burnt out, parking lot empty except for 1 or 2 trucks. It's open 24 hours, but after midnight it feels like time itself slows down in there. I used to take the night shift because it paid extra. But after what I saw on that job, I'd rather starve than work another midnight shift again. Most nights were dead quiet. We'd get the occasional trucker, a drunk couple from the bar down the road, or someone just passing through. I liked it that way. It was peaceful. Until one night when something strange happened. I was cleaning the counter when I heard the kitchen bell ring. It only rings when an order comes through on the system. But the screen was blank. No orders pending. Still, the bell rang again, 3 times. Ding, ding, ding. That's when I noticed a small ticket printing itself out of the machine. It was old-looking, the paper yellowed and curling, and the text read, Table 13, Meatloaf Special, Extra Gravy. Frowned because we didn't have a table 13, we only had 12 tables. Always had. I called over the cook Jimmy and showed him the ticket. He just went pale and muttered, "Don't mess with that, just ignore it." When I asked what he meant, he shook his head. Every few years it prints one of those. My uncle used to work here back in the 80s. Said there used to be a table 13, but they tore it out after something happened. I laughed it off at first, thought it was just some local ghost story. But when I went back to the dining room, I froze. In the corner, where there should have been an empty space between booths, there was a table, old, cracked, covered in dust. The sign above it read 13. I blinked, looked away for just a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. 2 nights later, around 2:30 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting a trucker, but the parking lot was empty. A man stood near the doorway. Tall, wearing an old brown coat, hat pulled low over his face. He didn't say a word, just walked past me and sat down. At table 13. My heart dropped. He didn't look up, didn't move much. Just placed his hands flat on the table and stared at the wall. When I hesitated, he finally spoke, voice dry and slow. "I'll take the special. Extra gravy." I almost dropped the notepad. That was the exact order from the phantom ticket. Against my better judgment, I took the order to Jimmy. He looked at me like I'd just said something insane. "You're serving him?" Before I could answer, he said, "You can't. He's been dead for 40 years. Jimmy told me everything. Back in 1983, there was a man named Raymond Holt, a regular customer who always sat at table 13. He came in every night for the same thing, meatloaf, extra gravy, black coffee. One night, he just snapped, got into an argument with the cook over a wrong order, pulled out a gun and shot him, then turned the gun on himself. They cleaned up the mess, tore the table out, and renumbered everything so no one would ever have to sit there again. But sometimes the story went, when the diner gets too quiet and the night too long, Raymond comes back, still waiting for that meal he never got to finish. I didn't believe him. Not really. So I brought the man his plate anyway. When I reached the booth, he didn't look up, just stared at the food. Then slowly raised his head. His eyes, they were gray and cloudy, like he'd drowned in milk. His skin looked dry, cracked, like old paper. He smiled and said, "Smells perfect." Then he started to eat. Only the fork didn't quite touch the food, it passed through it. And yet the meatloaf slowly disappeared, bite by bite. By the time I blinked, the plate was empty. He placed a few coins on the table, old rusted ones that looked decades out of circulation, and whispered, "Keep the change." Then he was gone. No sound, no door chime, just gone. When I told Jimmy, he refused to believe me, until he went to clean the booth the next morning. Because somehow, there was still a plate sitting there, half-eaten meatloaf covered in congealed gravy. The air around it was ice cold, and underneath the plate was a napkin with something written in shaky handwriting. Sorry about the mess. That's when Jimmy quit, walked out and never came back. I stayed because I needed the money. But after that night, the tickets kept printing. Always the same order. Always for table 13. One night I got brave, or maybe stupid, and tore the paper out of the machine mid-print. The next second, the kitchen lights flickered out, the power cut completely. And in the darkness I heard the bell, ding, 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 just like the night it all started. When the lights came back on, every single chair in the diner was turned toward me. Every single one. Except the booth at table 13. That one was empty, but the seat cushion was indented, like someone had just gotten up. I quit 2 days later. Couldn't take it anymore. But the owner begged me to cover one last night shift before the new hire arrived. I said yes. Biggest mistake of my life. Around 3 a.m., the printer started going crazy, spitting out dozens of tickets, all blank. Except one. It read, "You forgot my coffee." The smell hit me first, burnt coffee and rot. Then I saw him. Raymond Holt, standing in front of the counter, eyes hollow, skin gray, hands dripping something dark and sticky. He raised his cup, slowly. "You never brought my coffee." I backed away, stammering, I'll get it, just please." He smiled. Too late. The lights blew out again. When the morning crew came in, the entire floor was covered in old, rust-colored stains. They said it looked like spilled sauce, but I knew better. It was blood. The Crossroads Cafe shut down a year later. They said it was a wiring issue, something about the foundation. I drove past it last week. It's abandoned now, weeds growing through the asphalt, windows boarded up. But as I slowed down to look, the neon sign flickered on for just a moment. The red light buzzed and glowed. Open 24 hours. And in the window, right where table 13 used to be, I saw a man sitting alone, staring out toward the road. Even from the highway I could tell. He was waiting for someone to bring him his coffee. There's a reason I don't work night shifts anymore, especially not in restaurants. When you spend enough time in hospitality, you start to notice things, patterns, weird habits, customers who seem off. But what happened to me wasn't a pattern. It was something I still can't explain. It all started when I took over a small restaurant called the Mariner's Table. It had been closed for almost 15 years after the previous owner passed away. The place had history. You could feel it in the floorboards and the smell of old wood and sea salt that never quite left the walls. I thought I could revive it, bring it back to life, but maybe it never really died. I bought the Mariner's Table because it was cheap. Too cheap. Everyone in town said it was cursed. But I figured that was small-town gossip. The first few weeks were normal, busy even. People were excited to see the old place reopen. We got great reviews, and the staff was solid. But then small things started happening. Every morning when I had unlocked the front door, there would be a single chair, pulled out at the far corner booth. Table 9. I'd push it in, wipe the table, move on. But the next day, it was out again. Every single morning. I figured one of the cleaners was playing a joke until I realized something that made my stomach twist. That booth didn't have a cleaning schedule. It was never used. Never even assigned to guests. It was reserved, according to the old seating chart, for Mr. Hale. When I found the old reservation book in the back office, I laughed at first. It was from the 80s, full of smudged names and faded ink. But there it was, page after page. Mr. Hale, table 9, 10:30 p.m. Every Friday night, for years. The last entry was dated October 17, 1987. The same day the previous owner, Gordon Heller, supposedly disappeared. I thought it was weird, but I didn't believe in ghosts. So when that first Friday night rolled around, I decided to sit at table 9 myself. At 10:30 sharp, the lights flickered. Just for a second. The air got cold, like freezer cold, and the smell of salt water filled the room. I looked toward the door, expecting someone to walk in, but the door stayed closed. Instead, the old jukebox, in the corner unplugged and dusty, started to play, a slow, haunting jazz tune. I froze, and then I saw movement in the reflection of the front window. A figure, tall, thin, sitting across from me in the booth, but when I turned around, no one was there. I laughed nervously and got up, but before I left, I noticed something on the table, a folded receipt. The paper looked decades old. It read, "Thank you for your service. The meal was perfect. H. Hale 4. Things get worse." After that night, the weirdness didn't stop. Every Friday, someone, or something, was at that booth. Glasses moved, chairs scraped. Once, the point-of-sale system printed a ticket for Table 9-1 filet, rare. No one had entered the order. The kitchen staff thought I was pranking them. Until the smell hit us. Grilled meat, butter, wine, coming from an empty pan. Then the cameras caught it. One night, the closing shift watched the live feed and saw a man sitting in that booth. No face, just a faint outline, like static in the shape of a person. He didn't move much. He just sat there, looking straight at the camera. When we checked the footage the next morning, that segment was gone, deleted. The history of Mr. Hale, I started digging into local records. Turns out, the Mariner's Table was originally owned by Gordon Heller and his business partner Henry Hale. They opened it together in 1974, but by the late 80s, Hale had vanished. Rumors said the two had a falling out. Something about money, something about a missing shipment. And one night, Hale just disappeared. Some claimed Gordon killed him and buried him under the restaurant. Others said Hale cursed the place before he died. Either way, that booth, the one I'd been cleaning, every morning was his. I thought I could ignore it. Until the night everything went wrong. It was a stormy Friday, just like the ones in the old photos of the restaurant from the 80s. The wind howled through the vents, and the rain pounded the windows. At exactly 10:30 p.m., the lights flickered again, and every single kitchen appliance turned off. No sound, just silence. Then, the doorbell chime rang. We hadn't used that chime in months. I walked toward the dining area, flashlight shaking in my hand. Table 9 was occupied. A man sat there in an old gray suit, his head lowered, a hat shadowing his face. Water dripped from his coat, forming a puddle beneath the table. He looked soaked, like he'd just climbed out of the ocean. I managed to stammer, "Sir, we're closed." He slowly looked up. His eyes were hollow, literally hollow. Empty, sockets staring right through me, and his mouth moved. My meal was perfect. Then the lights exploded. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the dining room. It was morning. Everything was normal again, except for one thing. The booth was gone, ripped out of the floor, nails and all, and in its place was a large, wet stain that smelled of seawater and rot. I quit that day. When I went back to collect my things a week later, the landlord told me the restaurant had been condemned. Something about foundation issues. He said the inspectors found a sealed hatch beneath where Table 9 used to be. It led to a small concrete room. Inside, they found a single chair and a human skeleton, still wearing a name tag that read H. Hale. It's been 3 years since the Mariner's Table was torn down. I moved 2 towns over, started a new life. But 2 nights ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a folded piece of old receipt paper. It read, "Thank you for your service. The meal was perfect. H. Hale," and when I touched it, my fingers came away wet with salt water. I was 23 when I got my first real kitchen job. It wasn't glamorous, just a position at a fancy new restaurant that had opened downtown. They called it Maison de Lune, House of the Moon. It was the kind of place where reservations booked out weeks in advance, where couples came for anniversaries, and where the prices didn't even have decimals. I didn't know it then, but that kitchen would change my life, and not in any way you'd ever want. When I showed up for my first shift, the smell hit me before anything else. Not the typical kitchen smell of onions or grilled meat. It was rich, sweet, metallic, almost like rust mixed with perfume. The head chef, Chef Luca, was a tall, pale man with surgical precision in everything he did. He didn't talk much, but everyone feared him. When he walked in, conversations stopped. Knives froze mid-chop. That night, I was assigned prep work, washing vegetables, cutting herbs. But as I worked, I noticed something strange. Luca personally handled all the meat. No one else touched it. He'd disappear into the walk-in freezer, stay there for minutes, and come out with these vacuum-sealed bags of meat I couldn't quite identify. No labels, no supplier tags, just plain plastic. When I asked one of the other cooks, she whispered, "Don't ask. That's the special ingredient." Over the next week, I started hearing rumors. They said the restaurant had a secret supplier, that Luca had connections overseas, that people would do anything to get their hands on his recipes. But something didn't add up. Once, during cleanup, I found a small ID badge wedged under the counter. It was cracked, smeared with grease, and it had a name, Miguel Tovar, line cook. No one in the kitchen knew a Miguel. When I asked around, people just went silent. Then one of the dishwashers muttered under his breath, "Don't bring that up again. He quit." But his tone didn't sound like someone who'd seen a man quit. It sounded like someone who'd seen a man vanish. 2 weeks later, Luca asked me to stay late to help him organize stock. It was past midnight and the restaurant was dead quiet. He handed me a clipboard and said, "Go into the freezer. I'll bring the next batch." The freezer was massive, lined, with hooks, shelves, and dozens of metal bins. The air was so cold it burned my lungs, but what caught my attention was the noise. Faint, rhythmic, like breathing. I froze, listening. It was coming from the far end, behind a row of hanging carcasses. When I walked closer, the shapes looked wrong, too thin to be pigs, too long to be lambs. And then I saw it. A hand, a human hand, pale and stiff, hanging just low enough for the sleeve of a chef's coat to show. I stumbled back, dropped the clipboard, and ran out of the freezer. Luca was standing right there. His expression didn't even change. He just said, "You shouldn't be in there alone." Then he locked the freezer behind him. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a mannequin. But the next day, the smell changed. Stronger, sweeter. That night, the restaurant was full, and Luca told me to assist him at the plating station. He prepared a new dish, a fillet with a deep red glaze and golden crust. He leaned close and said, "Try it. Tell me what you think." I didn't want to, but his eyes made refusal impossible. I took a small bite. It melted instantly. Tender, flavorful, almost addictive. But there was something in the aftertaste. Something wrong. Luca smiled. "You understand now," he said. "The secret to perfection isn't seasoning, it's sacrifice." I couldn't sleep for days. I kept seeing that hand, that smile. Finally, I decided to dig deeper. One night I broke in after closing. The alarms were easy to bypass. Luca always left the back door slightly ajar to smoke. Inside, the restaurant was pitch dark. The only sound was the hum of the freezer. When I opened it, there were new bags on the shelves, each one labeled with a date and a number. But one had a tag that made my blood run cold. Employee Charm 27, harvested October 12th, and taped to the inside of the door was Miguel's ID badge. Before I could run, the lights flickered on. Luca was standing in the doorway holding a butcher's knife. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," he said softly. "You were coming along so well." He stepped closer. "Every great chef leaves a piece of themselves in their work. Some of us take that literally. I bolted, slipping on the icy floor, crashing into a shelf. The bags fell, splitting open, and that's when I saw the truth. Bones, muscles, pieces that shouldn't have still looked human, but did. I screamed and sprinted out, barely managing to slam the back door behind me. I went to the police. They searched the restaurant, but the freezer was spotless. No bags, no bodies, no blood, just perfectly polished stainless steel. They said I was overworked, hallucinating, that I'd probably inhaled cleaning chemicals. Maison de Lune reopened 3 weeks later under a new name. Same staff, same chef, same smell. It's been 2 years since I left that city, but last week I saw a food blog video trending online. A smiling reviewer sat at a restaurant table, cutting into a familiar filet glazed deep red. The caption read, "Try the all-new Maison de Soleil. Chef Luca's return to fine dining." And in the background, for just a second, I swear I saw a face in the freezer door reflection. Mine, because I never escaped. At least not completely. I still wake up tasting that sweetness on my tongue. And sometimes, I can still hear the freezer breathing.